been in the business of employment for more than 20 years. And he, through all of his experience and consulting, has come up with a quotient system for people to really determine their value in any of their work environments. This is revolutionary. I have read his book. I think it's extraordinary because oftentimes people can't quantify what they do if they aren't in a sales environment. If you have a sales goal and you far exceed that sales goal, well, then you know what you have done. But what if you're an accountant? What if you're someone like me, a librarian? What if you are in human resources? What if you are a secretary? How do you do that? Well, Mr. Gillis has a means of quantifying the quality of your work. So, Rick Gillis, let's talk about your quotient system and your new book, Leveling the Pain Field.
All right, let's do
And
that.
thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. You know, it is interesting. I'll start with a little bit of history because I don't have an advanced degree. I have an undergraduate degree in business. I have no PhD, no master's degree, but honestly, I think this is a new process that I came up with, and it was almost accidental. Matter of fact, it was accidental. It came from 23 years of working with clients in job search and job search support. I helped start the first job board in Houston, Texas back in 1997. I was employee number one with two guys, and we started in their dining room. And being the very first in that field, and I mean the very first, there was no competition when we started, was remarkable because I was out teaching people how to use the internet for job search. And because I was the first out there, it was fascinating because I was walking into places and explaining, first of all, what the internet was. And I used to tell people it's just like a library. You're just accessing this portal, you're walking in, and then you find your way into all these different topics, which is the same as going into a library and finding the different departments, the different sections, the different, shelves. And so what happened, though, principally, is I was calling on human resource departments, I was calling on staffing companies, and what I was learning was that how they did things and how they hired and their criteria and their methodology was not what I was hearing in different meetings I was going to. There was job search support, and this was during the internet bubble. This was during a couple of financial crises, and so I was working with. I ended up speaking all over the nation. I ended up hosting 2 radio shows in Houston, 1 TV show in Houston. I've written now altogether 7 books. My first 6 books were self-published. This Leveling the Paying Field came out of that practice and working with clients because what I came, and in the beginning, I just kind of randomly worked with anybody, and I was teaching myself the business as well. But working with everything from new college graduates to CEOs, I recognized over and over and over, and this goes directly to the premise of the book right now, that we're talking about leveling the paying field. People think that bringing in a project on time and under budget is an accomplishment, and it's not. That's what you're supposed to be doing. That's what you're supposed to be getting. That's what you're getting paid to do, is do the right thing in the best, most efficient way possible. But along the way, I was learning how people also have done lots of amazing things in their career that they weren't aware of until I started bringing it to their attention. I'd ask questions, and over and over and over, I kept finding these people that had these amazing accomplishments they were not aware of. Now, I need to back up a little bit right now because what's important to this narrative is that I'm a sales guy and I've been selling for years and years and years. When I was a kid, my family had a little hardware store and I was selling there. A salesperson has what I call the accomplishments mindset, and this is something I want everybody who works to embrace. The accomplishments mindset and a salesman's mindset is this: I'm always thinking about how I'm going to make that next deal. I'm always thinking how I'm going to close the existing deal. I'm always thinking how I can make contact with a potential buyer. That's what, and this doesn't stop on Friday evening when we check out. This continues Saturday, Sunday evenings, all the time. We're thinking like that. Salespeople do, but the person who takes home a paycheck on Friday afternoon, whether it's hourly or salary, makes no difference, leaves the office, leaves the work site, and doesn't even think about what they're going to do until they get back Monday morning. And that's what I want to change, because people need to understand. And from my experience, and this is going on 23 years now, virtually everybody I've ever worked with has done more and had more accomplishments than they're really aware of, that they recognize. And when I start digging into it, they learn about this. Now, my criteria in working with a job search client is really simple. And I will tell you candidly, 90% of people who approach me to work with me do not decide to go with me. And I'm fine with that, because I can't be successful if they will not maintain and honor my one non-negotiable rule. And that non-negotiable rule is this: if you're going to work with me, you're going to first start with giving me, and it'll depend on if you're entry level or if you're a senior professional. If you're a senior professional, I want 12 to 15 professional best accomplishments. I want you to write down the who, what, where, when, why, and how. You're going to write all this down. You're going to give me this narrative. And to tell you a true story, a woman I worked with, she was a chemical engineer, and she embraced this and she went and did it. She brought back 18 pages of accomplishments that she had handwritten, telling me all the details about it. And candidly, she was very proud of herself. So she came in and she handed me these 18 pages of the handwritten documents. And I looked at the first one and I handed it to her. And I looked at the second one and I handed it to her. I'm like, man, this is great. I looked at the third one and she says, "You're not going to read those?" I said, "Heck no, I don't even know how to speak chemical engineering. I don't even know what this stuff means." But what she had done that she was not aware of, and this is what all of my clients do if they stay with me, is they have created the information that is relevant and important to write a resume. Because until you know your accomplishments, you can't write a resume. And more importantly, we create a document that I call the accomplishments inventory, or the accomplishment statement. And you can find that document on my website, rickgillis.com. If you scroll to the very bottom of the page, it says job support or job search documents. Click on that. You'll see I've only got 3 pieces of information there, but you'll see the sample document. When you get to an interview and you go in with this accomplishments document, all of my clients, I prep them and let them know they're going to shove your resume to the side and they're going to say, "We want to talk about this accomplishments document." And what I have done when I work with my client, I take all that who, what, where, when, why, and how, and I break it down into one sentence. And that one sentence is exactly this: I was responsible for blank that resulted in blank. Now, the first blank is filled by I was responsible for what I did that resulted in wow. I want a net value, an accomplishment. I don't care if it's $1,000, $10,000, $10 million. You save the company 15 hours, you reduce man hours, whatever you did, I want a net result there. And that's what's on this accomplishment statement. From all that work, I reduce it down to one sentence for my client. When you get to the interview, and understand this is really critically important. The only reason you're ever going to get a job anywhere, I don't care how young you are, how old you are, gender, race, anything, makes no difference to me. If you express to somebody how you're going to make them money or save them money, you're going to get a job. It's that simple. And when you go in with this accomplishments inventory, what happens, and this happened with C-suite clients too, you put it in front of the people you're going to talk with, and they're going to start challenging you this stuff. And because you have gone through my process, you are top of mind, ready to answer those questions, ready to tell them exactly how you did it. It becomes a consultative interview where you're sharing best practices. And I always tell people, don't hold back. They need you. Tell them how you did it. Share it. If you invented something, tell them you invented it. It's okay. The most important thing is you express your value. And that in turn led to where we'll go next, Susan, is my accomplishments. Out of that came this accomplishments model and my quotient process.
Now, what I find fascinating here is that what you're really teaching people to do is to see their worth.
Yes.
And I have been and continue to be a private tutor. When I sit down with students who don't believe they can write a paper, I get them talking to me and I write down what they say. And then I read it back to them and I say, isn't that an incredibly good idea? So why don't you trust yourself to express yourself? Because you have good ideas. And essentially what you're doing is teaching them to value an idea, but also to value that idea that they had that turned into a quantifiable result. And that's very difficult for people, I think, because the corporate environment is not created to empower people that way. So
Well, Susan, let me interrupt. I'm sorry. Let me interrupt. This is really important because you just nailed it and you don't even realize how you nailed it. Um, when I first came up with this idea, and I'll explain the idea in a minute, the first thing I did is I called a personal friend of mine, a professional friend of mine, and explained it. And he said, I think you need to talk to somebody and challenge this. So I called a friend of his who he's one of my consultants for the book. I interviewed this guy who's a retired chief financial officer. And what I learned, exactly what you're saying, is that in the accounting systems, in the accounting process, this quotient idea of mine does not exist. And what I learned was that I said, so how do you determine the value of a paycheck worker? How do you determine the value of somebody who's paid hourly or salaried versus somebody who's commission sales? And he said, there is no way to do that. And I was, well, you got to be kidding me. And he explained to me, now this man had retired as the chief financial officer of a hospital group here in Houston, Texas. He had 48 entities under that umbrella. So he really had a lot of moving parts. But he explained to me, he said, Rick, let's take a surgical suite. He said, and I'm going to keep this really brief, but basically he said there's 11 people working in this surgical suite and they're conducting an operation. When that operation is done, and that's important that we have 11 people in that room, from the $35 an hour orderly all the way up to the $1,000 an hour surgeon, okay? And so when the surgery is done, they know how to add up the cost of the surgical suite, all the the utilities, the environment, the inventory, everything. But then they take all that and they add it all up and they divide it by the number of people in the room, 11, so that the orderly is rated in terms of value contributed. That $35 an hour orderly is rated at the same value delivered as the $1,000 hour surgeon. And I said, you're kidding me. There is no way of determining an individual's specific value. And he said, no, there isn't. And I was astonished when I learned that because like I said, Susan, this was a God wink. This was a gift. This came out of 23 years of working with people, most of which could not pay me because times were so bad that they were trying to determine whether to put gas in the car or pay the gas bill during, all these different financial, collapses and the bad economy and all that stuff. So I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people that never paid me a dime. And I think this was a gift that I received because coming up with this concept, I had no idea it was groundbreaking. And I'm not the one that said that. I felt in my heart when I first came up with the idea and was writing this, that it was groundbreaking. But it took a professional friend of mine at the EEOC who I was talking to one day. I was actually interviewing with him with him for the book. And he just flat told me, I told him about it. And he said, Rick, this is groundbreaking. And I just said, Joe, I am so glad to hear you say that because number one, I respect your opinion. Number two, I didn't want to be the first person to say that out loud because I knew this was unique. And the more I have shared it with people, now, that said, it is unique. It is very simple to do. And we'll talk about that process in a little bit. The hardest part about the Leveling the Paying Field book, the hardest part of this process, and we talked about this before we came on the air, Susan, is that the individual has to learn how to determine the value they contribute to their employer. And see, one of the things, and I'm going to back up to what you were saying a minute ago, because you're talking about working with these people individually, and What you can do then is you can see how, like you said, you had them talk this out, you wrote it all down, you showed it back to them, and they were happy talking about it. Now they need to learn to write it. When those people learn to write those accomplishments out and then go out and share them in public or put them in a resume or whatever else, and they land a job and they become paid and contributing to society, et cetera, you can claim a piece of that action. And it's not saying you're taking the money out of that, but you can say if you help somebody land a $35,000 a year job or a $60,000 a year job, you could be running these totals and adding it all up. So at the end of the year, you can say, I helped 27 people land an aggregate of $320,000 in annual income. That's a big deal. And I know you've never even thought about your work like that before, because none of us do. But that's where I have taken this quotient. So that said, let me go ahead and explain the quotient model, unless you want to say something else before I go there.
No, I think that's fabulous, because when you're working in any kind of environment, when you're getting students to believe in what they can do, believe in what they have done, and then they will not settle for something that isn't successful, because
And they'll understand why. Yes.
yes, then they understand why. And I think from what you said, it's very important for some people, and for most, just not quite off topic, but for most students, trying to write that dreaded college admittance paper of who am I? What have I done? That's very difficult for people, because they don't really believe they've done all the things they have done. So I think also, from what you're saying, it's very important for people who, in creating that list, they create a partial list, and then they talk to trusted colleagues at work, they talk to family, and it's like, but you did this, and then they create that inventory that goes into what you will now explain with the quotient.
Well, and that is very much exactly how it's done. Because I tell people, call former coworkers, friends, family, and say, hey, when you and I worked together, do you remember anything special that I did? And I tell my clients, out of every 10 of those calls you make, you might only get one or two responses. We're going to say, Joe, don't you remember that time you did? And then that might be enough to go, yes, I do remember.
Yes.
Other people are going to go, no, not so much. And you say, great, thanks. But you know what? It's an opportunity to reconnect and maybe network with somebody you haven't talked to in a while. So during job search support, I've always said that. But so let me explain the quotient, because this is the math behind it. And let me tell you, I'm not a math person. This is arithmetic. This is multiplication, addition, subtraction, and division. That's all it is. But if a person can pay attention, and I'll give you an example of one of my own. If a person can pay attention to the value they deliver, and this is something they have to go into their company and start determining, like I just told you, start getting creative with ways, but there's also ways, there's intranet in a lot of big companies that do have these different valuations that you can access. What I learned in talking to a lot of organizations in writing this book is that the intranet is available in most companies to everybody. It's not just necessarily a need to know, but most people don't ever go into it because they don't have a need to use it in their job. But quite frankly, most places I found, and I found some places where it's not accessible, but most places it is accessible, and you can actually see costs and all kinds of things going on. But the quotient is this, very simply, by a method that I'll explain a little bit as we get a little further into this, how to value your work. Let's say that I pay you $50,000 a year, Susan, and we determine, or you determine, or I determine at the end of the year that you delivered $250,000 in value to the company. $250,000 divided by $50,000 equals 5. Your quotient equals 5. Now, one of the things I'm about is I call the book Leveling the Paying Field. And the reason for that is because once everybody starts doing this quotient thing, now you can start comparing everybody's value. So let's say, once again, you and I work together. I mean, no, I'm not your boss. You and I work together. We do the same job. We have the same qualifications, etc. But I'm male and you're female. And my quotient this year was a 7, which means I delivered 7 times my base pay and value back to my employer. Your quotient was a 23. You delivered 16 times more value than I did to the organization, but because I go have drinks with the boss and play golf sometimes, I got the promotion, I got the raise, I got the bonus. So now you have potentially a claim, and this is documented. This quotient is documented. It's defensible. You have to take that accomplishments inventory. You have to assign a value, and your superiors are going to be able to see that value and determine if you're outrageously out of line or if you're in place. And of course, I teach that you go conservative with all your valuations. But you find out that you were, well, here comes January 1st. I got the promotion, the raise, and the bonus, and you delivered 16 times more value than I did. You could go to HR. You could have a discussion with them. You could go to the EEOC if it gets really heavy duty and you go outside your company. And like I told you, my friend told me, the man at the EEOC, 23 years there, said, Rick, he says, I think this would be defensible and I think it would stand up in a court of law. I have not passed this by an attorney. I am not going to. It's not my place to do that. But he said he thought it would survive a challenge, assuming it's all good information, it's documented properly, et cetera. And then the final nuclear option is if you can't get satisfaction, if you can't get pay parity, or better, what I prefer to call, rather than equal pay for equal work, I prefer the proper pay for the best performance. That's my mantra that I go with. But so if it doesn't work, the nuclear option is you go find another job, take that resume of yours and that list of accomplishments to the competition and show them what you're doing and say, I'd like to work for you, but I want to be paid properly. And listen, the other thing too that's important in this dialogue, in this narrow piece right now, is that I talk about promotion, raise, and bonus in terms of financial terms. Maybe you had a one-off year this year, Susan. Maybe that 16 times was a really unique year. There were opportunities that came up. You took advantage of them, but others didn't. So maybe next year you won't have as good a year. So this year, at least you should be entitled to a bonus. It may not be promotion worthy. It may not be a raise. But if you start seeing this 2 or 3 years in a row, you're definitely entitled to a promotion and you're definitely entitled to the bonus and a raise. And you should probably be the person leading that department and moving forward. Now, backing way up to the very beginning, I did not say one of the things that I'm doing here is suggesting that instead of waiting on the government to establish pay parity, which things are getting better infinitesimally, but rather than waiting on the government to create pay parity or enact it into law, or waiting on your company to enact pay parity, I want people to embrace this themselves. And that's where I wrote this book. I wrote this for the individual. Now, that said, the first 65% of the book is written to the individual, and the last 30 to 35% of the book is written for enterprise and how businesses can implement this. And I do have my first draft training already created, so I'm ready to start taking this further and farther out there. But anyway, Susan, I know that's a lot of information, but that's really about the first 10 pages of the book.
Well, exactly. And then in the book, just so everyone will know, you give examples per types of employment, how to implement this. From office workers to construction workers. So you prove the point that it is usable across the board.
Right.
I think it's important to say that if someone were equipped with this going into a job, that person immediately starts this my worth in this program in building worth. So let's just say someone is using your quotient system and 3 years later in being with this company shows this amazing value. And the person takes it to HR and HR, this is not a worker friendly environment, for example, but you have written all this, you have all of this, then you take your worth to another place of business that values this and looks at this, because also You're telling somebody, I know how to quantify.
Right.
That what I'm going to tell you in what I do is not, I made a sale. I made a sale that did this. Now, many employers are going to find that so valuable because I think it makes it easier on them because
Well,
they know what
yes,
they have.
you did it again. You nailed it. That's a
Yeah.
huge point. The quotient is a double-edged sword. By the way, people would know this. In the book, it's spelled QTNT. It's pronounced quotient, and it's a trademark name. I've trademarked QTNT for the quotient. But employers are going to love this because it's a double-edged sword. It not just points out your winners, those people that are generating value. It also points out those people that you're overpaying that are not generating value. Because one of the questions I was asked early on was, where's all the money going to come from to start paying all these people better wages? And I said, it's going to come from those people you eliminate who have not been delivering as much or as regularly as you thought they were. So the quotient process is really easy. And I'll tell you what, you mentioned the Q studies. The Q studies are there's 14 in the book, and those are my step-by-step description different people that I worked with, and I determined their quotient, and that's all the way from an executive assistant, a coder, all the way up to I have a chief technology officer, and those are real true stories. Of course, I changed all the names, except I will give away one of them, quotient Q study number 13. The lead guy in that one, his name is Brad. That's actually my story. That's actually my personal story. It's a real estate story because I did real estate for 10 years. And I'll tell you what, let me tell you the story. Well, I'll tell you what, better yet, let me talk about quotient Q study number 2. Her name is Lisa. Lisa was the executive administrative assistant for a small medical healthcare company. She reported to the CEO and the COO. And the reason I like to talking about this story is because Lisa is a personal friend of mine, not her real name, but it doesn't matter. You couldn't find her from that anyway. But she's a personal friend of mine, and I spoke with her 4 or 5 or 6 times during the 3 or 4 years I was writing this book. And so we were talking one day, one evening we were talking, and she said, Rick, I don't even relate to what you're talking about. And I sat back and I went, whoa, what do you mean? And she says, well, you're talking about these people that saved $1 million and these people that made $1 million and all this stuff. And I went, wow, she kicked me upside of the head. It was a great conversation, very beneficial to me because she says, I don't even relate to those kind of dollars. And I went, wow. And I said, you know what, Lisa, you're right. I said, I'll tell you what, over the next 2 or 3 weeks, and this is that accomplishments mindset, I said, start paying attention to what you do as you do it. Be making notes. And that's part of my strategy that's in the book because people have to start thinking this stuff. Like I said, like a salesperson is always thinking about where they're going to land their next deal. People need to start paying attention to what they do as they do it. And I do have a plan and a strategy in the book for doing this. But 2 weeks later, she calls me and she says, you're not going to believe this. And I said, yes, I am. Tell me what happened. Now, important to the story, Lisa's making $66,000 a year. And and I'll have to explain the different types of quotient levels there are, but she was making $66,000 a year. And she had a feeling that the person who was managing one of their electronic contracts was not doing it correctly. And she took it upon herself, not her responsibility. She was responsible to the CEO and the COO at that time. She took it upon herself to review this contract. And what she found was $72,000 in credits that were owed to the company once every month they would hit a certain threshold had not been collected, and the person administering the contract had neglected that. She discovered $72,000 in credit that was due to the company. That's more than she was earning an entire year. She was making $66,000 a year. So to explain how the quotient works, first of all, there's a Q equal 1. Now, a Q equal 1 or your quotient equal 1 is a factor that means you are doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing and you're going to keep your job because you are justifying your pay, your overhead, all those different things. A Q greater than 1 means you're making the company money or saving the company money. And it is my contention that everybody does this. Some more, some others, some not as much, but everybody delivers more value, even if it's just sporadically, spot here and there, or maybe some people just do it all the time. Chapter 19 in the book is titled, Your Employer is Not Responsible for Pointing Out Your Wins. That's a really important consideration, because while companies do bonus and they do give certificates and they, gifts and all that stuff, you don't really know what they're doing it for. So in other words, if you have $1 million win, you may never hear about it. And quite frankly, my story in Q study number 13 is exactly that. I saved my former company millions of dollars, and I didn't even realize it until 10 years later when I was thinking back on it, working with a client. So anyway, Lisa now her Q1 is $66,000. Her Q equal 1. She has to deliver $66,000 in value annually in order to keep her job. Obviously, much, much more is better. And she saved $72,000 in this one incident. So if you take her Q1 of $66,000 and add to that this $72,000, now she has created a value contribution to her company of $172,000. Now you take that same value, because what you do, take the annual value of your contribution over this, although this can be done on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, all that stuff. It breaks down several ways. But in this case, we're talking about annual at performance review time, that kind of thing. You take the $66,000 plus the $72,000 equals $138,000, but then you divide that by your base pay. So the Q1 is your base pay. You use the Q1 at your base pay tally, the total for the beginning of this calculation, and you use it at the end of the calculation, because when you've added up your Q1 plus all those extra wins you had, and then you divide it by your base pay. So what that means is she had $172,000 in contribution to her company. You divide that by her base pay, her quotient is 2.09. So in less than an hour of work, Lisa was able to double the value to her organization by discovering that $72,000 windfall for the company. She found more money than she was going to be paid that year, which, by the way, she's making far more money now, and she's only now working for the CEO, where she was working for two people previously. But now let's assume reasonably, and I in my PowerPoint when I do this training, I point out that let's assume she had 15 of these kinds of wins in a year, not just one. This one, get her motivated, but now she's paying attention and she finds 15 times she saved $72,000. And I'm using those numbers to keep it real easy and to see. But that comes out to about $1,380,000, which means that and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's about that. But that means if you divide that by her base pay, that $1,380,000, her quotient was about 16 or 17 for the year, which means she generated 16 or 17 times more than her base pay. This is an employee you want to bonus. This is an employee you want to keep. You don't want to lose this person. She is gold. I maintain most people who have been on the job for more than a year are starting to find their way and are starting to add value on a regular and consistent basis.
And I think also based on that, she was able to do that in that time frame. Well, one is not always going to have a year where one finds that kind of money. However, that person has proved his or her worth, because there will be opportunity again, because this person obviously does more than just the Q1, is looking for improvement, and that is the employment style of this person. This person really wants not only to personally succeed, but wants the company to succeed. So therefore, that becomes a win-win. I do have.
Well, you know what, Susan, let me interrupt for a second. This person is now, if you will, this is not a good word to use, but that person is mentally trained now to pay attention to what they're doing, which is exactly what you said.
But you see, I think that is really one of the core points here. You mentally train yourself, given something that is quantifiable and not soft. that you are actually creating an equation that proves your worth, and it is doable. I have questions about how would you do this in a softer environment? Say if you worked at a nonprofit, if you worked for a museum, for nonprofit people who maybe what they have done is increased awareness of their programming. How would you quantify that increased awareness or bringing more clients in? How would you do that in this kind of equation in a softer environment? When
Well,
I
I'll
say
tell you,
softer environment, I mean profit versus nonprofit.
right. Well, let me tell you what, invariably, and I'm first of all, I'm going to do the cop out on answer on that, and then we'll talk
Okay.
about it. My cop out answer is this: at the back
Yeah.
of the book, I deliberately am inviting anybody who has read the book and gets to this last. It's really on the next to last one of the last
Yes.
pages of the book. I'm asking anybody who would like to co-write a quotient book for their industry, their vertical, to reach out to me and let's talk about that, because I am prepared to, with the publisher, to write companion books for leveling the playing field. Because I don't know, like I told you a while ago, I don't know anything about chemical engineering.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about determining the value of engineers. I could roughly,
Mhm.
broadly say something, but to get specifics, I don't know IT. I don't know medical. I don't know retail. I don't know fashion. So I want people to help me write those books to make a companion, a little, my own little micro dummy series, if you will. Now, back to the point. I had I had coffee yesterday morning with a brand new friend, and she is a writer for one of the biggest newspapers in the nation. And this is an introduction from a personal friend, so it wasn't a PR thing or whatever. But I took her book and we discussed this whole model and idea. And she said, "How do I?" I mean, she writes literally. She writes articles that pop up online and are regularly seen. And I said, that's really not that hard based on what you do, because in her case, and this is kind of soft, if you will, based on the metrics we're talking about here, you can see how many click-throughs, they can track everything they're seeing. And if you are writing stuff that's getting lots of tracking, that's really easy to see, and you can assume that that's all value. Now, in your case, being the soft piece, there's a couple of things I would say. Number one, if you're finding, it's a matter of tracking. This is a matter of personally tracking. And so you might even say, today I helped 18 people get to X, which, and just literally numbers are going to speak. However, one of the things that I'll tell you is that pay parity in the United States does exist in one place, and that is anywhere there are federal dollars involved. Because federal dollars mean that I can look up your salary. My wife used to work as in our county, and she was a county attorney, first assistant county attorney in the legal department. I could look up her boss. I could look up the mayor. In Texas, I can look up the Senate. I can look up the governor. I can look up everybody and see exactly what their rate of pay is. We know that the US president makes X dollar. We can look all that stuff up. So anywhere there is federal money involved, those numbers will be available that you can go out and see. So there, pay parity can exist because it's all apparent. Whereas in private industry, that's not the case. Now, once again, I want to make sure to be clear, there are companies moving in the right direction. I just learned the other day of a very large energy company here in Houston implementing pay parity, and I was blown away. However, what was fascinating about that, I mean, they're a very, very, very large company, and I got this inside information from somebody who sent it to me, but they're not based in the US.
Interesting.
They're
Interesting.
not based in the U.S. However, they have a huge presence in the United States. And I thought this is great, though, because if one big company does it, they're going to attract more talent to them, and these other companies are going to start seeing that talent move away, and they're going to want to step up in order to keep their talent. So I think that's it's reciprocal. It's a rolling wheel. But so anyway, talking about what you do, I would really, and this is interesting because in working with an organization and working with training, I would want to learn more about that company before I moved in, or entity, it doesn't have to be a company, to know more about how they are funded. What criteria are you used to get more additional funding? And if it's a matter of X amount of heads walking in every morning and walking out every day, maybe we needed to count that. How many of those people that you're able to get to come back? How many of those people you're able to help that you can track and say, as a result of my efforts, this person was able to find a better job? There's really a lot of metrics. There's a lot of moving parts to this. And I'm not dodging the question as much as I can tell you, I don't have a good answer until I get into the organization and start looking at it very closely.
Well, and that really is a good answer, because it puts
Thank
it
you.
again. Well, I mean, the point is,
Right.
it puts it back on the employee, because in many systems, where the employee may feel like, I'm not really being developed, I'm not really being paid what I should be paid, but I know I'm doing all this. Again, you get back, even in a soft system, I get back to the quantification, and then I sit down, and if I can use your system to really, again, and I keep getting back to the word quantify, because I can write paragraph after paragraph, but I haven't quantified. And I think that's the basic point here. You've created a very clean system to do that. Now, as you said, this is developed. It's not embryonic, but it's still developing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This thing has, I think I said it earlier, I have an undergraduate degree in business, and I think this thing can be learned and shared and grow into, I think artificial, I think I think AI could be impacted by this thing. I think data, information, and the business of metrics through and around this is gigantic. It's way beyond me. Like I said, I'm not even an algebra person. I took algebra twice in college, so I didn't take a D the first time. I took a B the second time. I don't do math. I don't think math, but I can do arithmetic really well.
Well,
But I will still check the numbers. But the quantification is the key, and everybody in their industry, in their vertical, knows inherently what it takes. In your case, it might be getting more bodies into the library on a daily basis, or a weekly or a monthly basis, let's say. What does it take to do that? Does it take personality and people who are good at working the crowd, good at guiding them, good at showing them the facilities and all that there is to offer? Um, is it your marketing professionals who bring that talent there? Is it a matter of keeping somebody more than 7 minutes in the building, as maybe 90 minutes, maybe an hour and a half? There's several different ways to measure this kind of stuff, because I'm going to bet you there is some person who does the metrics in your city, state budget, wherever it is, and there's some kind of a way they have determined the value of each person that walks in that door. I would think. I don't know what that means. I have no idea. You might want to move up and down, but you might even ask the people to do the accounting for the library. How do you guys determine what success looks like? And I've always told people that that's one of my big questions I ask people in working with them in terms of job search. What does success look like for what you do? Because that helps me understand more about what we're guided, where we're aiming towards. Success in what you do does not mean that's only for your immediate vertical. There could be lots of different places. Maybe you're working in a hospital would generate the same or more value. Maybe working in a senior community might generate more value. So, there's, what does success look like? That's a really big question. It's a very broad question.
yes, yes, yes. But this is a starting point. This is a starting point for people to determine worth. And I think that that's very much the bottom line. And as I said earlier, I think it's important that if one were to take this into a new job,
Oh
then
yeah.
one should take this into a new job You know, even if one were just starting out or if one were in the middle of a career, it's like, what have I done? How do I quantify this? And that puts it into very clear, negotiable terms.
You know
And
what,
so,
Susan? No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no. Please do. Please do.
Okay, you know what? I want to go back and share my story with you for Q study number 13, which is my personal story. In there, I call myself Brad. Brad was actually my immediate supervisor, and I adored the man. He passed away many years ago. He was like a father figure to me. But let me tell you the story, and this is a true story. I managed an office park that was one of 26 that my company operated across the United States. Matter of fact, well, we did have one in Memphis, a real prominent one. Our company was based out of Jacksonville, Florida, and I managed the El Paso operation. I had about 400,000 square feet that I managed. And anyway, one day it's a Monday morning. I'm in my coat and tie. I'm walking into the office, and I walk in, and there's a Texas sheriff. This is in El Paso, Texas. There's a Texas sheriff standing inside my office. I walked in, and I could see Gay, the lady who ran the office. I could see her looking at me like, uh-oh. And I walked in, and I just see this guy, and he's got his big hat on. He's got his big boots on. He's a big old dude. I'm this little guy in a coat and tie, and he goes, "Richard Gillis?" And I went, "Oh, no." And I was like, and I said, "Yeah." And he hands me an envelope, and he says, "You've been served." And he walks out the door. And I go, "Oh, man." So I opened this envelope. Well, I'm being sued by a broker who said I owed him a commission. And I had 185 tenants in this property. Okay, so I didn't know this guy a commission. So I called my boss, and he said, "Do you want the attorneys?" And I said, "No." I said, "Let me look into this first, but I don't know what to think." So I went back to the original lease. This was a lease renewal for an insurance company, a national insurance firm. And I went back to the original lease. It had been created by my predecessor. And sure enough, there on page 16 or somewhere, I found a little handwritten note that said, "Realtor will be paid on all lease renewals." I had made the mistake. Nobody else had made the mistake. This was me. I didn't catch that. I called my boss up, and I said, "Brad," like I said, I use his name. "Brad," I said, "I need an $8,000 check." And fortunately, at the time, we were a very wealthy company. And he said, "Really?" He said, "You don't want to find it?" And I said, "No, I made a mistake, Brad." So he sent me an $8,000 check. I went and paid the broker, came back to the office. I walked in, and I said, "Gay," that was the lady who ran the office. I said, "Gay, you and I are going to go through every single lease, and we're going to put a cover sheet on top of every single lease. And we're going to be looking for any additions, anything that's an anomaly. We're going to make a note of it." She went through all 185 leases. I went through all 185. We put together a cover sheet, and I called it my lease abstract. 3 months later, this took us about 10 days, a week and a half. About 3 months later, my boss comes to town, and he opens up a lease. And he opens it up, and he looks at it, and he sees this cover sheet, and he says, "What's this?" And I said, "Well, Brad," I said, "I got really upset with myself when I made that mistake, and I didn't want it ever happen again. So I made a cover sheet so that in the future, we'll know that on page 3, there's this change, and on page 17, there's this change." And he just looked at me, and he kind of goes, "Wow." Well, 3 months later, he had taken it back to corporate. And 3 months later, all the other 25 other office parks across the nation were required to do what I had done. I saved the company millions of dollars in legal fees by avoiding that one mistake. And I was not aware of it, and that's what's important. At that time, I was not aware of what I had done. I was just, woohoo, this is great. I got my 3% raise. I got my 3% bonus. I got, all that stuff. But when I started working that out, and I remembered this 10 years later, I did not have those numbers. The company doesn't exist anymore. It all got sold off 10, 15 years before I remembered the idea. So I went back and I took my legal budget, which I knew what my legal budget was. I remembered because I had to put my budget together. I was there for 10 years. I had to put a new budget together every year. And so I took my legal and I multiplied that times 0.01% and extrapolated that across 26 office parks. And I figured I saved the company on the order of $1.5 million to $2.5 million annually. And so whenever you submit a valuation to somebody, you have to do it conservatively. So in leveling the paying field, I actually say that I saved the company $1.5 million a year. Now, at the time, I was making $56,000 a year. So if you take $1.5 million and divide it by 56,000, I don't know what that is, a quotient, what, 25 or something. But I didn't get a raise, a bonus, and I got nothing out of that. The problem is, who was right for not getting noticed and not getting a bonus? Who was right? Was it me or was it the company? Well, the fact is, it was both of us. They should have acknowledged me, but I also should have known enough to say, "Hey, Brad, I saved at least $1.5 million a year. Isn't that worth at least a 1 or 2%, 15, $20,000 or something?" I didn't know enough to say that. That was my bad. And see, this is the kind of stuff that happens all the time that people are not aware of. And let me tell you what, in a company that was $1 billion company, saving $1.5 million was not the biggest deal on the table. So it was incumbent on me that I go forward and I make sure they know that I did this. That was my bad. And I'll tell you what, while I'm talking about that, I've worked with lots, I'd say 5% of my clients have been women. Women don't stand up for themselves. Women don't negotiate. That's my experience in going into a job. And listen, I'm not blanketing because I know I've worked with women who have done really well. However, broadly speaking, women feel that they're bragging or they're boasting, and that's wrong. This is about informing others of your value. This is not informing, especially when you have good numbers, conservative numbers, defensible numbers. You can show them to somebody. That is not bragging or boasting. That is informing. And that alone might be enough. That idea might be enough to get some people thinking, I can get past the guy I'm working for or anybody else that's in their way around them. And listen, once again, this is regardless of gender, age, race, I don't care what it is. This book, and even for men, this book works for everybody. It's not just written for women or just for people of color or any of that kind of stuff. It's not that at all. This is for anybody who feels they're not being paid properly and can go and learn how to defensively present their case. And that's really what the quotient is very much about. So yeah, I went through this myself. And I didn't realize it till 10 years later that I should have been bonused pretty significantly, because I saved the company a ton of money.
Exactly. And what you did was you took that one mistake and turned it into something that hugely benefited the company. It's like, yes, I made a mistake. However, I exponentially corrected that mistake because everyone's going to make a mistake. It's like, what does one do with it? How does one improve? And in your case, it's like, yes, I did this. However, look what my learning from this did for the company. Because every person is in that position at some point.
Well, it's funny you say that, Susan, because accurately, to be very specific, I lost the company $8,000 in that deal. And the deal still made money, but it didn't make as much money as it did because it was a 3-year lease renewal. But
Yeah.
I should have taken in that $56,000 I made that year, I should have reduced that amount by $8,000 to account for that. And actually, I couldn't. I would have to add that to it because then it would be artificial. I would actually be making the number larger. But even by adding that $8,000 that I spent, I cost the company. I still made them a ton of money. And, it reminds me of a story, and I think it was Andrew Carnegie. I forget what, maybe when Carnegie, maybe it was Rockefeller, one of the industrialists here in the United States. Somebody, I'm pretty sure it was Carnegie. Somebody working for him lost $1 million in a deal, and he went in the next morning and presented himself and said, "I'm sure you're going to terminate me." And he said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "I just spent $1 million making you smarter. You're not going anywhere." That's a great employee. I'm not saying any company can afford that necessarily, but it's a true story that can be Googled. And I think that's a really wise person who said, "Are you kidding me?" So my $8,000 cost the company significantly less than the net result. And I ended up being with the company an additional 6 years after that. It wasn't like I went anywhere. But anyway, back to the point. There are several Q studies in the book that take you step by step, and it's all the way from a guy who's a coder to my chief technology officer. There's you mentioned the construction guy. His stuff is really interesting. The money he saved his company that they just didn't recognize was profound, and it was interesting because he was one of the first people that I devised the quotient around because he knew his company was not doing well, and he actually started looking for another job. And he actually found it with the company that they were contracted to help build this. Well, it's one of the biggest. Matter of fact, they're probably your industrial. They're probably one of your utility providers there where you live in the southeastern United States. And he's got a great job, and he's using this accomplishments model for best practices inside the company. And that's what it's turned to. And so anyway, what else you got for me?
Well, I think that really capsulizes what the importance of this, how it's used across the proverbial board, and the importance of people, as you say, knowing their worth and how to determine that worth for themselves, how to quote unquote sell themselves, and realize that if in doing this and realizing what you bring to a company, if that company doesn't recognize that, that empowers you to go to someone somewhere that does. So do you have, I think it's important that you show your book to the screen.
Okay.
I think that's important. I think people.
I just moved one of my dogs away. I've got 3 dogs laying around me here. I think you can see it. There it is, leveling the playing field.
Now,
By the way, Susan, I want to say something too that you were, once again, you just reminded me again of something really important. Most people do not make their company money. Most jobs are not about making the company money. Most people don't generate revenue. Most people save their company money by being efficient. And that's what I call your personal commercial value, because if I can hire somebody and pay them less money than I'm paying you to do what you do, your commercial value is not as high as you think it is. However, if I get rid of you and find that I have to takes 3 people to replace you, then first of all, shame on you for not having let me know. Shame on me for not having known you were delivering that much value. And it's going to cost me that it took me 3 people to pay 3 salaries to get the work you were doing. And I've seen that happen in organizations several times. So I want people to understand, anybody who works for a paycheck, your business is probably about saving the company money and being efficient. And that there is nothing wrong. Not everybody generates revenue, but generating savings and revenue are the same to an owner, to a business owner, to a company. When they can see that they were able to get the work out of you that it would have taken 2 or 3 other people, that's huge. So anyway, that's a really important statement. And so you keep bringing me back to these things, Susan. I appreciate it. But anyway, here is my book, Leveling the Playing Field, and the subtitle is A Groundbreaking Approach to Achieving Fair Pay. My website is rickgillis.com, and anybody can go there. And if you do get a copy of the book, please write a review for me on Amazon, because that's what makes the little thing tick.
Is there anything else that you would like to add? It's been a pleasure speaking with you. It was seriously eye-opening for me reading the book, because I thought, oh, this is so helpful. This is quantification.
How did you feel about the read? How is it smooth? Did you understand it?
Oh, yes. It reads very, very well. And if anyone wants to know, I have a master's in English, and that's important to me. So I can say, as someone who has read a great deal with a master's in English, it does read quite well.
Well, let me tell you what, I have to give all the credit to my editor, because she was spectacular. I don't think there's a sentence in this book that she didn't touch. And she kept my voice, but she made it a great read. And Diana Graveman's the lady who edited this book. And wow, she did a heck of a great job.
Well, so is there, I thank you for this time. I trust that people will click in and listen to this. Thank you so much. The Memphis Public Library appreciates your time, as do I. And just so people will know, I am the librarian at the Parkway Village Library. The Memphis Public Library has 18 locations, and I am one of the many librarians. So thank you so much.
Susan Berry, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
To stop the recording.